You may have remembered an impassioned Christmas sermon delivered by Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, minister of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, Christmas Church in Bethlehem. It's a sermon that received widespread attention on social media and international news networks, drawing similarities to the South African experience, transition from apartheid to a democratic South Africa, but also the role of theologians, the role of various faith communities to bring about change in South Africa, but also in the Middle East. Here's just a small little recap of a part of that service that received widespread attention around Christmas time, delivered by Reverend Isaac.
Maybe more than anything, we were troubled by the silence of God. In these last 2 months, the Psalms of Lament have become a precious companion to us. We cried out, my God, why have you forsaken Gaza? Why do you hide your face from Gaza?" In our pain, anguish, and lament, we have searched for God and found him under the rubble in Gaza.
Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac joins me now in studio. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Your thoughts about the attention that particular sermon received around a very important time for Christians the world over, but particularly Christians in the Middle East, in the West Bank and Gaza?
Yeah, thank you. I was actually conflicted about how I should feel about the attention it received. I was definitely surprised, but also sad, because the story should have been Gaza and not a sermon in Bethlehem. And if a sermon should go viral, it should go viral about good news, about the news that God loves all people, not about Palestinians being traumatized by a genocide, by the silence of the church, and in our struggle to keep our faith alive in the midst of a very difficult genocide. Yet I was grateful that these words reached unprecedented level of attention all over the world, even quoted at the ICJ court case, and really touched the hearts and souls and challenged many people around the world, so that no one can claim we did not know. No one can claim we didn't see this coming.
You've been in South Africa for the last few days now. I'm sure you're well aware of South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy, but also the role of faith-based communities in that tradition. I've read and heard in some quarters, some considering you, and I don't know, and I'm sure you will. You won't take this lightly, but also you'll scoff at it. Some have called you the tutu of Palestine, and I see you rolling your eyes there a little bit. But the role of interfaith communities in the Middle East at the moment, particularly if we're talking about 33,000 people killed in Gaza, but a continued occupation also in the West Bank.
Yeah, well, first I will be just honored to be in the same sentence with Archbishop Tutu, let alone compared to him. A giant and inspiration to all of us. But it's not just the theology that justified this genocide. Theology has been weaponized. The Bible has been weaponized against the Palestinians since the very beginning, since the inception of the state of Israel. And in fact, there is so many similarities between what we call Christian Zionism and between apartheid theology. Both are based on an ideology of supremacy. Both use the Bible to justify colonialism, and both use the Bible to justify violence. And that idea is very strange to me as a Christian. I think of Jesus as the most peaceful person, who definitely did speak about God's judgment, God's justice, but taught us always to turn the other cheek and challenge our oppressor, even to see the humanity, even God's image in our oppressor. So sadly, there are many similarities, and Part of our role as people of faith is to dismantle these ideologies and theologies that, rather than promoting the good news that God is for all, they promote this idea of a tribal God.
The Middle East conflict, largely based on this polemic of, and this binary, it's either Muslim Palestinians on one side and Jewish Israeli on the other, and that is the binary that we often have this conversation. Is, of course, there is a Christian, quite sizable Christian population in Palestine as well. But how do you want to take this conversation beyond just the religious biases of people either actively involved in this conflict or people who are commenting or showing support on either side in this conversation?
No, I actually have a big problem with the characterization of the situation using religious polemics. It's not a religious conflict. We always emphasize that. Our problem as Palestinians is not with Jews. Our problem is with Zionism and colonialism. And when Israel was established by the Zionist movement, they did so on the expense of all Palestinians, regardless whether they were Muslims or Christians. Many Palestinian Christians lost their homes, lost their lands, became refugees. They're still in diaspora all over the world, denied the right to return. So it is not as if there are Jews and Muslims caught in the land and have been fighting, and then Christians are caught in between. This is definitely not just the wrong characterization, but it's misleading, and it turns away from the real essence of the problem, which is the colonization of our land by the Zionist movement. And at the same time, I would emphasize it's not a conflict. Many people look at it as a religious conflict. I always say it's not religious and it's not a conflict. A conflict gives the impression that there are two equal entities in the land fighting. But in reality, there are the indigenous Palestinians who are just fighting for their rights, for our ability to continue to exist in our land, the land of our ancestors, versus the colonizers, the state of Israel, which continues to push us out of our land using different measures and means, and most recently this genocide in Gaza.
We make clear that the world does not start on the 7th of October 2023, and this is a continuation of 78 years of occupation in Israel. But I'd like your thoughts, and I was at the speaking event last night at the Grote Kerk, where in fact it was a Palestinian refugee to South Africa that asked you on your thoughts on the attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October that leads us now, and we argue it could be an inflection point in the history of this particular conflict. Nonetheless, 33,000 people are dead, 14,000 children killed. But your thoughts on the events of October 7th?
My thoughts is first and foremost, as a pastor, I don't support violence. I don't, I lament the killing of every innocent person, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. Our emphasis has always been, don't isolate October 7th as if it is the triggering point of this conflict. And this emphasis on October 7th seems to me a way to distract from the wider context of a brutal, dehumanizing siege for over 16 years when it happened. A siege that led the UN General Secretary Guterres to say, if there is hell on earth for the children of the world, it is for the children of Gaza. And he said this before October 7th. And beyond that, the fact that 70% of the people of Gaza are refugees from 1948, still denied their right to return to their homes, to their villages, still without any political rights. So if you miss that component, and sadly we've seen this coming, this is the thing we kept saying. As a religious leader in Bethlehem, I always meet with politicians and religious leaders from all over the world. Before October 7th, we kept saying we saw it coming. The current status quo is not sustainable, and my fear is that something similar will happen in the West Bank, because the Israeli regime is becoming more and more oppressive towards people, confiscating land, denying us of our rights. And this is the tragedy, that this could have been stopped. This war could have been avoided. Yet right now it seems there is no courageous leaders to even stop it.
What's your thoughts on a language of imagination? Firstly, what is your hopes for the people of what is now called Israel, what is now called Palestine? What's your hopes? And we can talk about the historic failures of Oslo Accords and peace plans, but I feel that we've largely lost a language of imagination of a future for the collective futures of the people living in that region. What is your hope? And I've largely feel that we've lost the imagination of a singular state, even where current Palestinians would share equal rights in a unitary state. But I don't know if geopolitics allow for that. I don't know if the personal opinions of the people in Israel or Palestine at the moment allows for that imagination. Your thoughts?
Well, definitely any support for the one-state vision took a strong hit after this war, because the gap between Palestinians and Israelis have increased dramatically, and the enmity and hatred. From the political level, I've always said there are three ways forward. The first is the continuation of the current status quo, and that's catastrophic. It's going to lead to more violence. I'm very concerned about this. And it seems more and more world leaders are beginning to realize this. The second option is to divide the land, the two-state solution. It's, to be honest, it's up to Israel and its supporters to enforce that. Palestinians accepted 22% of the land, and even that wasn't granted. As we speak about the war in Gaza, Israel continues to build settlements deep inside the West Bank, preventing any possibility of a Palestinian state. So this takes us to the third option, a one state in which the colonizers accept that they have to give the indigenous people their full rights in this land. And right now, I know this scares Israel, but this is where they've led us to, because we're not going anywhere as Palestinians. We're still in our land. There are still 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews. I love how you characterized it using the phrase vision, because as a person of faith, as a pastor and theologian, I've always spoke of the concept of a shared land. It's more of a faith concept or a theological concept, if you want, a biblical one, in which we realize that it is God's land. It's not ours. No one can claim possession of the land. No people group can claim exclusive possession. And there should be, we should be equal, have equal rights in this land, regardless of our nationality, ethnicity. This is, in my opinion, our mandate as faith leaders, to promote such a vision. How does that translate into political solution? Sadly, politicians have failed us, but I will continue to argue that the best way forward is for us to share the land and for Palestinians and Israelis to live as neighbors. We have to accept that neither of us is going anywhere.
And is there a growing sentiment between Palestinians and Israelis? I'm seeing more and more reportage of protests, particularly against Benjamin Netanyahu coalition government made up of fragments of the right fringe in that particular government at the moment. But is there a common language spoken amongst Jews, Muslims, Christians, atheists within the Middle East?
So right now, sadly, the arena is dominated by, on the Israeli side, the extreme voices who continue to spread fear and continue to argue that we should just completely destroy Gaza, or Hamas, as they say. And the rhetoric right now on the Israeli side is horrifying, to be honest. And on the Palestinian side, what do you expect from people going through a genocide right now? I mean, everyone is literally horrified for their lives. My only hope is that first we need this war to end. and that after all the dust settles, people come to their senses and realize we have to figure out a way to move forward. And apartheid cannot be that way. Segregation and one people dominating the other cannot be that way. Otherwise, those on the receiving end of apartheid will continue to resist, and we will continue in the same cycle that's leading us to more and more death and killing.
With reconciliation should come a means of justice. There is no peace without justice, as you have said before, but also with reconciliation comes forgiveness. We may be a very, very far line before we reach that point, but your thoughts on ICJ ruling? There is talk of the Israeli government preparing for an indictment against Benjamin Netanyahu and senior members of his cabinet in the International Criminal Court. Let's talk very quickly about the system of peace, justice, and reconciliation.
Well, to begin with, people need to be held accountable before even talking about forgiveness or reconciliation. Those who committed war crimes must be held accountable. And this has been our problem in that Israel were never held accountable. They have immunity. They enjoy this immunity from world powers, most importantly American vetoes. They have committed and continue to break the international law without ever being held accountable. And it seems that always the pressure is on Palestinians to accept peaceful solutions or to promote reconciliation. Right now, the way I describe it is that if you have two men fighting, then it's appropriate to talk about reconciliation. It's appropriate to talk about peace. Right now, we don't have that. We have one man literally, with their boots on the neck of the other, and has been doing so for years. And for us Palestinians, what we're asking for is protection, is for that boot to be removed from our neck before we're able to even talk about peace and reconciliation.
Reverend Munther Isaac, really appreciate your time, Minister of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem.